The day started like any other. The sun hadn't fully crept over the city skyline, casting long shadows across quiet streets as tired parents hurried their kids toward yellow school buses. Most mornings blend together. The same routine, the same sleepy faces, the same wheels grinding over the same cracked pavement. But this particular morning, it would split lives in two. Because when a bus driver looked into the teary eyes of a small child and chose to do the unthinkable, a hidden truth came to light that no one saw coming. And lucky for you, someone captured every second of it on camera. But before you jump to conclusions, before you decide who's the villain and who's the victim, you need to see what really happened. You're not just watching a video today. You're stepping into a story that will twist your assumptions, challenge your instincts, and leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about kindness, justice, and who's really paying attention. Let me ask you something. Have you ever seen something that didn't sit right with you? Maybe it was small. A child alone at a bus stop. A mother scolding her son in a grocery aisle. A teenager being treated like nothing more than a problem to solve. And for a split second, you thought, should I step in? Most people don't. Most people look away. But not everyone. And it's those few, those rare individuals, who remind us that the truth has a way of finding its way out, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. That's exactly what happened on a freezing Monday morning when a woman on her usual commute pulled out her phone after hearing something that sent chills down her spine. A child, barely old enough to speak clearly, sobbing at the front of a school bus, being ignored. Now, before we go any further, I want to say this. You're not here by accident. You clicked on this video because deep down, you needed to know. Something about that title tugged at you. Maybe you're a parent. Maybe you ride the bus yourself. Maybe, like a lot of us, you're tired of the way people ignore what's right in front of them. And I'm telling you right now, you're going to get the answer you came for. You're going to see what really happened on that bus, who stepped up, who stayed silent, and why that morning changed more than just one little boy's day. It changed lives. But to understand how deep this story goes, and why it's now making waves across TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube Shorts, you need to hear everything. From the first scream to the last second of that viral clip. This isn't just about a bus ride gone wrong. It's about the small cracks in our system, the moments of human failure that add up until they become something impossible to ignore. And it's about one moment, just one, where someone decided to hit record, not because they wanted views, not because they thought it would go viral, but because they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. You'll meet her soon enough, a woman named Sandra, who commutes every day in silence, headphones in, mind on autopilot. But on that morning, something made her pause. Something cut through the usual noise and forced her eyes upward. And once she saw what was really happening in front of her, she couldn't unsee it. Let's talk about the boy. His name is Dylan. He's 6 years old. Blonde hair. Big eyes. The kind of kid who hugs his backpack like it's a teddy bear. That day, Dylan wasn't being loud. He wasn't being disruptive. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just crying. Softly. At first. A low whimper that most adults would probably brush off as tiredness or fussiness. But this wasn't ordinary crying. This was something else. And while other kids on the bus kept to themselves, Sandra noticed that the driver didn't even glance back. Not once. Even as Dylan cried harder. Even as he began to panic. That's when Sandra pressed record. Not to go viral, but to protect the truth. Because in today's world, video is power. It's accountability. It's the difference between being dismissed and being believed. She didn't know where it would go. She didn't know what it would uncover. But something in her gut told her this wasn't just a tantrum. It was a warning. A signal that something was deeply wrong. And that's when things took a turn no one expected. Because just as Sandra hit record, the driver said something that shocked everyone. I'm going to walk you through everything. The raw footage. The background no one saw. The moment the school district got involved. And yes, what the investigation revealed when parents and teachers started asking questions. But more importantly, I'm going to take you into the emotional core of the story. The part where a mother shows up to the bus depot with tears in her eyes, demanding answers. The part where a stranger becomes a voice for a child who couldn't speak for himself. And the part that leaves you wondering, what would I have done if I were on that bus? I want you to stay with me. Not just because this story is emotional, not just because it's shocking, but because it matters. We live in a world where stories like this disappear too easily, where children are silenced and brushed aside, where authority figures are trusted without question. But not today. Today, you're going to see what happens when the camera keeps rolling, when someone stands up instead of looking away, when the quiet moments turn into movements. This story taps into something bigger than just one bus ride. It taps into our shared sense of justice, into the viral obsession with caught-on-camera moments that expose the truth, raw, unscripted, undeniable. It's the kind of story that makes its way into your social feed because someone saw it, felt something, and had to share it. And now you're here, which means you're part of it, too. So, let's make something clear. By the time this video ends, you'll know the full truth. No clickbait. No half-told version. No spinning it for views. Just the story. As it happened. The child. The driver. The footage. And the moment that changed everything. But for now, I'll leave you with this. When Sandra uploaded that footage later that night, she didn't expect it to go viral. She didn't expect to get flooded with DMs from people across the country. She didn't expect the school district to launch an emergency investigation or for national morning shows to come calling. And she definitely didn't expect what would happen when the bus driver was finally questioned under oath and said 5 chilling words that no one could forget. What did the driver say? Why was Dylan crying? And what did Sandra's video really reveal? Stay with me because the real story is just getting started. Sandra Lewis wasn't the kind of person most people noticed. She worked a quiet desk job at a regional insurance office in the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. Nothing flashy, nothing that would make her stand out in a crowd. She lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment just off Morse Road, surrounded by peeling brick buildings and neighbors she barely knew. Every weekday morning at exactly 7:12 a.m., she boarded the number 31 school commuter bus, which made a series of shared stops for both public commuters and students headed toward the district's northern campuses. It wasn't unusual. In fact, the district had adopted a budget-sharing program over a year ago, which meant parents, office workers, and school children all shared the same aging yellow buses during peak hours. For Sandra, it was just a practical, money-saving routine until that morning. Until she found herself pressing record on her phone with shaking hands, capturing something that would spiral her quiet life into a national conversation she never asked to be part of. But to really understand what made Sandra act that day, you have to know what happened in the days leading up to it. Sandra had been noticing strange things, not just with the buses or the routes, but with the children. Specifically, a small group of kids that always seemed too quiet. Dylan was among them, though at the time Sandra didn't know his name. She had started recognizing the same faces every day, kids in oversized coats, backpacks almost bigger than their bodies, often sitting in silence or clinging to the window seat like they were trying to disappear. What bothered her wasn't what they said, it was what they didn't say. No chatter, no giggles, no early morning tantrums. Just a kind of stillness. As if they'd already learned that the world wasn't listening. She chalked it up to nerves or shyness at first. But then, the week before the video, she overheard something between 2 children in the back row. Something she couldn't quite forget. One of them whispered, "Don't tell her, or she won't let us off again." At the time, Sandra didn't understand what it meant. It seemed odd, sure, but not enough to report. After all, kids say all kinds of things. But the tone, the anxiety in that child's voice, it clung to her. She even mentioned it offhandedly to her coworker Lisa during a lunch break at the office cafe, brushing it off with a laugh, even though deep down, it didn't feel funny. And now, with Dylan's sobs still echoing in her ears and that moment on video forever etched into her phone, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed something. Something big. Dylan's mother, Rachel Carter, was another piece of the puzzle. She worked overnight shifts at a nearby assisted living facility and relied on the bus system to get Dylan to school while she slept. She had no idea that anything unusual had happened until she got a call later that afternoon. Not from the school, not from the bus company, but from a stranger on Facebook who had seen Sandra's video circulating in local mom groups. The message was short but direct. "I think this is your son." Attached was a blurry clip of a small, pale boy crying near the front of a school bus, while a uniformed driver stared straight ahead, unmoved, unbothered, and seemingly uninterested in the obvious distress happening behind her. Rachel dropped her phone. Her heart nearly stopped. And, before she could even hit replay, the clip was already spreading. And here's where things started to get murky. Because when Rachel called the school to demand answers, she was told nothing unusual had been reported. No issues. No complaints. According to their records, Dylan had arrived safely and on time. But when Rachel pressed further, asking if her son had mentioned being upset, if the driver had filed any incident reports, she was met with vague answers and bureaucratic deflection. "We'll have to look into it. We'll get back to you. There's a process." It was the kind of language designed to pacify and delay. But Rachel wasn't having it. Not after seeing her son's face on video. Not after hearing that cry. As the clip gained traction on YouTube Shorts and TikTok, racking up shares with trending hashtags like #BusCamTruth, #ProtectOurKids, and #Caught-on-camera, more details began to emerge. Other parents started coming forward, some with their own suspicions, some with eerily similar stories. One mother said her daughter once came home with scratch marks on her arm after a ride on the same bus, but the school told her it was probably from a playground fall. Another claimed her son had wet himself after being too afraid to ask the driver to stop. A few even mentioned the driver by name, Marla Green, a woman with over 15 years of experience, a spotless record, and a reputation for being no-nonsense. That's where the confusion began. Because Marla wasn't a stranger to this community. She had driven hundreds of kids over the years, always punctual, always professional. Several parents even defended her in online forums, saying she'd been kind to their children and never raised her voice. So how could the same woman sit coldly behind the wheel while a little boy wept within arm's reach? Was she overwhelmed? Distracted? Was it a one-time lapse in judgment, or something darker? And why, when confronted with questions, did she refuse to comment? To add another layer of uncertainty, a rumor began circulating that Marla had recently filed a report of her own, one that never made it into the school's public records. Supposedly, she had raised concerns weeks earlier about inconsistent student behavior and deliberate distractions on her route. But no one could confirm if the report was real, and when asked directly, the district spokesperson said only, "We're conducting an internal review." No denials. No confirmations. Just enough of a half-answer to fuel suspicion. Even Sandra began questioning what she saw. Not because the footage had changed, but because new voices were entering the narrative. People who claimed the video didn't show the whole picture. A man who said he used to work with Marla posted anonymously that she had been struggling with personal issues for months after losing a child of her own in a tragic accident years ago. Another user insisted the crying wasn't what it seemed, that it was part of a game some kids played to manipulate drivers into getting off early. Sandra didn't know what to believe anymore. All she knew was that she saw a child in pain, and no one moved to help him. Then came the most unsettling revelation of all. Footage from inside the bus had apparently been recorded by district-installed surveillance cameras. Cameras that, by policy, were always active during transport. But when Sandra requested access through a formal records request, something she had every right to do as a concerned citizen, she was told the files were under administrative review and not currently available for release. That phrase stuck with her. It didn't say the footage didn't exist. It said she couldn't see it.
Not yet.
So, what was really happening on that bus? Was Marla hiding something? Was Dylan targeted? Was the district protecting one of its own, or trying to prevent a lawsuit? Every time an answer appeared to be within reach, another layer of confusion slid into place. And as Sandra watched the story morph and twist across platforms, from Facebook Reels to Instagram clips, she realized something chilling. The truth wasn't just being hidden. It was being rewritten, shaped by opinions, guesses, and manipulated clips from people who hadn't even been there. And just when it seemed the tension couldn't grow any thicker, Sandra received a message on her phone late one night from an unknown number. 4 words. No name. No context. You didn't see everything. The message haunted Sandra long after she'd read it. She stared at the glowing screen of her phone well past midnight, her thumb hovering over the callback button she knew she wouldn't press. You didn't see everything. It wasn't a threat, at least not on the surface. It felt more like a warning. Quiet, personal, and disturbingly intimate. Someone out there knew something, and they wanted her to back off. But it had the opposite effect. Instead of scaring her into silence, it lit a fire in her. She couldn't stop now. She had seen enough to know that something was deeply wrong, and every delay, every unanswered question, only proved it more. If the district thought they could brush this under the rug, they had underestimated the internet and her resolve. But just as Sandra was beginning to piece together a clearer picture, the obstacles began. The first blow came quietly. Her original video, the one she had uploaded to YouTube under the title "Bus Driver Ignores Crying Child, Caught on Camera," vanished overnight. No notification. No copyright claim. Just gone. When she logged in to check the analytics, she was met with a message that read, "This video is unavailable due to a violation of community guidelines." But it didn't say what guidelines had been violated. The comments had been mostly supportive. Angry, yes, but not abusive. The video itself showed no graphic content, no violence, no misinformation. Just raw footage of a moment that should never have happened. She appealed the removal immediately, but the automated response was vague and unhelpful. "Your appeal has been reviewed, and we've determined your content cannot be restored." That's all it said. Then, the school district sent her a cease and desist letter. Hand-delivered to her apartment by someone who didn't identify themselves, the letter warned her against making further defamatory claims or interfering with ongoing investigations. It was written in the kind of legal jargon designed to confuse and intimidate, cleverly worded to sound official without directly accusing her of anything. But the message was clear. Stop digging. Stop sharing. Move on. And still, Sandra pushed forward. She began privately contacting other parents, mothers and fathers she'd seen in the Facebook groups, people who had commented under her original post before it was removed. Most were cautious, some were hesitant, and one woman in particular flat out refused to talk, saying only, "We've already had one scare in this town. I'm not opening that door again." Sandra wanted to press, but something in the woman's voice made her hesitate. Fear. Real, visceral fear. Not of getting involved, but of reopening a wound. What scare? What door? That's when she found out about the Winford incident. 10 years earlier, a different school bus in the same district had been involved in a mysterious event, something that never made national news but still lingered in local memory like smoke after a fire. A child named Marcus Lane, only 8 years old at the time, went missing after getting on the bus one morning. The driver, an older man named Gerald Price, claimed Marcus never boarded, but several students insisted he had. The district conducted a full investigation, even released a public statement about possible mistaken identity and unconfirmed sightings. But Marcus was never found. The driver was quietly placed on early retirement, and the case faded into obscurity. No charges. No suspects. Just a boy who vanished and a community that decided it was easier to forget than to question. Until now. The deeper Sandra looked, the more tangled it became. There were whispers online, threads buried in forums, screenshots of deleted Reddit posts that hinted at cover-ups, internal politics, and something more disturbing, unfiled complaints from multiple drivers who had quit without notice over the years. Some mentioned strange behavior from kids, others described faulty surveillance equipment or altered route logs. And at the center of it all was an eerie phrase that popped up again and again: "Don't break the loop." She brought this information to Rachel Carter, hoping Dylan's mother might know something, anything, that could connect these dots. But Rachel was in no mood to play detective. Her trust in the system had shattered completely. Dylan hadn't spoken much since the video. He was eating less, refusing to get on any bus, even for short trips. When Sandra asked gently if Dylan had ever said anything about a loop or anything strange on the bus, Rachel's face changed. She grew pale, tight-lipped. "He says there's a place the bus goes where it's not supposed to. A road that doesn't show up on maps. I thought he was just having nightmares." Now I'm not so sure. And then came the betrayal. One of the parents Sandra had been working with, Matt Carson, a father of 2 boys at the same school, turned out to be feeding information back to the district. He had posed as an ally, someone who claimed his kids had seen something weird on the bus too. But in reality, he had been recording their calls and forwarding messages to the district's legal team. Sandra found out when she received an anonymous email from a Gmail account with no name, only attachments, screenshots, called transcripts, even a photo of her walking out of the cafe with her phone in hand. She was being watched. And it all started to make sense. The video takedown, the legal threats, the sudden silence from other parents. Someone was pulling strings, trying to suppress more than just bad PR. There was something buried here, something old, layered, and dangerous. The final straw came when Sandra returned to her apartment one evening and found her mailbox hanging open. The envelope containing her notes, timelines, and a printed list of names she'd been compiling was missing. Nothing else was taken. Not her rent check, not the coupons, just that one envelope. A clean theft. No broken lock, no mess. Just empty space. That night, as she sat alone in her living room, trying to make sense of everything, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a video file. No message. No sender ID. Just a 10-second clip. It was inside a bus. But not the one from before. This one was older, grainy, time-stamped from 8 years ago. The footage showed a boy sitting alone at the back, looking directly into the camera. He didn't blink. Didn't move. Just stared, unblinking, mouth slightly open like he was about to say something. And then, without warning, the screen cut to black, across town, while Sandra sat frozen in her apartment with a chilling 10-second video playing on a loop in her head. Another thread of the mystery began to unravel, one she didn't even know existed. Ben Travers, a high school science teacher and longtime friend of Sandra's late brother, had just finished grading a stack of midterm projects when his phone buzzed with a notification that made his stomach drop. It was a photo, sent from an anonymous number. The image showed the side of an old yellow school bus parked behind a building that looked eerily familiar. Spray-painted across the metal in faded red letters were the words, "You let it happen again." Beneath the text, barely visible in the low light of the photo, was a date. Not today's, not last week's, but one from nearly a decade ago. The date Marcus Lane went missing. Ben hadn't heard that name in years. Not since the night he'd received a frantic call from his brother, Mark, who was a janitor at the bus yard back then. Mark had told him something strange, about hearing voices echoing from bus number 214 after hours, even though it was supposed to be off rotation. The next day, Mark had been found unconscious inside the garage, the emergency lights flickering overhead, and no memory of what had happened. He eventually quit the job and refused to talk about it again. But that night, Ben remembered the fear in his brother's voice, and now, staring at the old photo, it all came rushing back with disturbing clarity. He tried calling Mark, but the number had been disconnected. Just like that. Gone. Meanwhile, Sandra, desperate for answers and feeling more isolated than ever, turned to the only person left she could trust, Jules, her college roommate and now an investigative reporter for a regional online news outlet. Jules had seen the video before it was taken down and had started doing some digging of her own, off the radar. What she found made her blood run cold. Through a Freedom of Information request, she had uncovered a transportation log from the school district showing that bus number 214, the same bus that Marcus Lane allegedly never boarded, had been reassigned last year after being refurbished. The official document said it was placed back into rotation quietly, without public notice. Jules cross-referenced the bus ID with internal GPS route data and found something even more bizarre. Several of the tracking records were missing, completely wiped from the archive. Not glitched. Not corrupted. Gone. As if someone had gone in manually and deleted the entries. It happened sporadically, mostly on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And the route it was assigned to? The same one Dylan had been riding. Sandra and Jules met in person later that night, both shaken and on edge. They shared everything they knew, Ben's mysterious photo, the deleted GPS records, and the chilling idea that maybe this wasn't just a story about a negligent bus driver. It was starting to look like a system failure, or worse, an intentional cover-up. Jules laid a thick envelope on the table. Inside were printed reports of other bus-related incidents dating back more than 15 years. Every few years, a similar pattern emerged: unexplained delays, children reporting strange detours, and parents filing complaints that mysteriously vanished from district logs. No media coverage, no lawsuits, just silent erasure. And behind many of these stories was a common thread: bus number 214, renamed and reassigned multiple times, yet always tied to unexplained behavior. But just when it seemed like they were closing in on something concrete, the story took another hard turn. Sandra received a package. No return address, no markings. Just a plain brown envelope slipped under her door sometime after midnight. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed the crying child from her original video, but this time, he wasn't sitting alone. There was someone beside him, a woman in dark sunglasses, looking straight into the camera, her face obscured but hauntingly familiar. Tucked behind the photo was a sticky note with a single sentence written in red marker: "She knows the route." Suddenly, everything shifted. Could someone close to Sandra be involved in this? Was there a connection she had missed? She took the photo to Rachel, hoping the boy's mother could identify the woman, but Rachel went pale the second she saw it. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself and whispered, "That's Mrs. Klein. She was Dylan's bus monitor last year. They told me she retired." Sandra stared at her, stunned. She didn't. She just disappeared. As Sandra processed this new piece of the puzzle, across town, Ben was digging through an old storage unit that had once belonged to his brother. Inside, beneath boxes of junk and dusty books, he found a locked file box. It took him nearly an hour to crack it open. What he found inside made his heart race: a stack of notes, crude drawings of looping bus routes, and a worn map with strange markings. In the corner of the box, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, was a flash drive labeled Ride Log 214. But when he plugged it into his laptop, the screen went black for a moment before a single. The flash drive never finished loading. Just seconds after Ben plugged it in, his laptop screen went black, the hard drive spinning louder than usual before going completely silent. At first, he assumed it was a simple glitch. Maybe the file was too old or corrupted, but then he heard it. A soft knock at the door of the storage unit. Not a loud pound. Not someone trying to get in. Just 3 slow, calculated taps that sent a chill through his bones. He froze, every nerve in his body tightening like a coiled spring. The unit didn't have any windows, just the one steel roll-up door and a back exit that hadn't been used in years. Whoever was outside knew exactly where he was, and they didn't need to say a word. His heart pounded in his ears as he scrambled to grab the flash drive and his laptop, stuffing them into his backpack. The knocking stopped. Dead silence. For a moment he wondered if it was his imagination, maybe nerves getting the better of him, but when he finally pulled up the door, the hallway was empty. No footsteps. No sound. Just a sticky note taped to the wall across from him, written in the same red marker as before. "You were warned." Back at her apartment, Sandra's world was starting to feel smaller, tighter, as if every room had eyes. She hadn't slept in 2 days, barely eating, glued to her phone waiting for messages from Jules or Ben. But neither had responded since last night. Then the texts started. At first they were random numbers. Coordinates, maybe. Or scrambled times. She couldn't make sense of them. Then came a single photo, a screenshot of a street camera feed, showing her walking to her apartment just hours earlier. The caption underneath read, "Wrong turn." She dropped her phone, her hands trembling. That wasn't surveillance footage. That was live tracking. Someone was watching her in real time. Panic surged in her chest as she slammed all the windows shut and locked the doors, her mind racing through every interaction from the past week. Could the bus driver have been a distraction from something bigger? Was she being used as bait? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she debated calling the police, but something held her back. Who would believe her? A mysterious school bus route, deleted GPS logs, and missing children that no one had reported? Her only evidence was gone. The video scrubbed, the bus vanished, and now both Jules and Ben were unreachable. It felt like the world was folding in on itself, warping everything she thought she knew into a blur of paranoia and unanswered questions. That night, she paced the floor for hours, the walls of her apartment closing in like a prison cell. Around 3 a.m., she finally cracked and called Jules' number again. It went straight to voicemail. On a hunch, she tried calling from a different number, a burner phone she'd bought earlier that day, just in case. This time, the phone rang twice and someone picked up. But it wasn't Jules. There was no voice, no greeting. Just static. Then a soft, distant humming sound, like the droning of an old engine. Slowly, the static faded, replaced by the faint sound of a child crying. Her skin crawled as the noise grew louder, layered with echoes of tires on gravel and the metallic creak of a bus door opening and closing. Sandra screamed into the phone. "Who is this? What do you want?" But there was no answer. Only that endless, looping nightmare of a sound that made her feel like she was already buried inside it. The next morning, she went to Jules' apartment. The door was wide open, and everything inside had been turned upside down. The couch cushions were slashed, hard drives missing, her notes gone. It looked like a robbery, but Sandra knew better. Whoever came here wasn't after money or valuables. They were erasing something.
Someone.
On the wall near the window, scrawled in black spray paint, was a message that didn't make sense. At least not yet. 213 was the decoy. Her mind reeled. All this time, she'd been chasing the wrong bus? Could there have been another vehicle, another number, another trail leading even further into the dark? Sandra stumbled out into the hallway, struggling to breathe. Her head throbbed with questions that had no answers. She called Ben again, desperate for a voice, a lifeline, anything. But this time, his number was disconnected too. In less than 24 hours, everyone helping her had vanished. It didn't feel like coincidence anymore. It felt like a game, and she was being hunted. She rushed home, heart racing, only to find her front door ajar. Her chest tightened. Slowly pushing it open, she stepped inside, her breath shallow, listening for movement. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Then she saw it. Her laptop, still on the kitchen table, had a new file open. She hadn't touched it in hours. The file was titled Testimony, and the screen showed a transcript of a conversation between two people. One was listed only as operator, and the other, her brother's name. He was supposed to be dead. As her legs gave out and she collapsed into the chair, staring at the words on the screen, Sandra felt the floor of her reality begin to crumble beneath her. If her brother was alive, where had he been all this time? Why had he never reached out? And who was keeping him silent? Before she could read further, the screen suddenly blinked and turned to black. Then a single line of text appeared. "You're too close." Her scream echoed through the empty apartment, but there was no one there to hear it. Sandra sat in the flickering glow of her darkened kitchen, hands still trembling over the keyboard as she stared at the black screen. That message, "You're too close," replayed in her mind like a threat wrapped in a riddle. She was paralyzed, unsure whether to run or dig deeper. But before she could decide, her phone buzzed, jolting her upright. A new text. No number. No name. Just a location and one word. Come. The address pointed to an abandoned railway yard on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that didn't exist on GPS anymore, but somehow still held the weight of the past. She hesitated for a long minute before grabbing her coat and sliding the burner phone into her pocket. She didn't know what waited for her out there, but something inside her had already decided. This was the only way forward. The yard was dead quiet, swallowed in shadows and overgrown tracks, the rusted skeletons of train cars looming like forgotten ghosts. She walked cautiously, each step crunching over broken gravel and glass, guided only by the dull blue glow of her flashlight. At the far end, she spotted a flicker of movement, someone waiting. Her heart pounded, ready to flee if anything felt off. But when the figure stepped into the light, her breath caught in her throat. It was Jules. Alive but barely. She looked worn down, her face pale, eyes sunken with fear. Sandra ran to her, stunned, overwhelmed with questions, but Jules raised her hand and whispered urgently, "You need to listen. Everything we thought we knew, it's wrong." Before Sandra could speak, Jules pulled a battered tablet from her coat and powered it on. The screen lit up to a hidden folder marked District Files, and within it, images, voice memos, and surveillance footage. But it wasn't about missing children or mysterious bus drivers. It was about a government pilot program, run quietly and off the books, involving behavioral testing on select school routes across the state. Buses weren't disappearing. They were rerouted to facilities under the guise of emergency drills, and the children on board were unknowingly part of a long-term psychological experiment. The crying boy on the bus? He wasn't in danger. He was planted, part of the test to gauge public response to perceived neglect. The goal was data, control, observation. But someone had taken it too far. Sandra reeled, her thoughts spiraling as Jules continued. Ben found the original files. He wasn't supposed to. That's why he's missing. He wasn't helping us.
He was helping them.
Until he switched sides. The words hit like a punch to the chest. Sandra's mind flashed back to every conversation with Ben, every moment he'd nudged her toward deeper investigation, always seeming just one step ahead. Could it be true? Had he been manipulating her from the start? Jules nodded grimly, reading her expression. He's been monitoring you, feeding them everything. The messages, the notes, he planted them. The whole thing was staged to push you into exposing the program to the public. That was the end game. You were the perfect candidate, someone emotionally tied to a missing person, someone relentless enough to take the bait. The ground beneath her seemed to shift. Nothing made sense anymore. If Ben had betrayed her, what was real? What part of her journey had been hers, and what had been orchestrated? She thought of the crying child, the bus, the message from her supposedly dead brother. Was he even alive, or just another layer in this mind game? Her throat tightened. She couldn't breathe. The truth wasn't just hidden, it had been constructed around her. She wasn't uncovering a mystery, she was the subject of it. Then Jules leaned in closer, her voice low. But here's the thing, they lost control. One of the buses never came back. One of the kids vanished for real. And now someone inside is trying to cover it all up. That's who's watching us now. Not just the program, but the one who's gone rogue. Jules handed her a small envelope, trembling. Inside was a photo, grainy and slightly blurred, but unmistakable. It was the same child who had been crying on the bus, only this time he was much older, standing outside a fenced facility with a look of pure terror in his eyes. Before Sandra could ask anything more, a loud crack echoed through the yard. A single gunshot. Jules crumpled to the ground. Sandra dropped to her knees, screaming, but Jules was already gone. Footsteps echoed in the distance, too many to count, moving quickly, closing in. Sandra grabbed the tablet, the photo, and ran into the night, tears streaming down her face as the truth shattered everything she thought she knew. But even as she ran, one question burned through her mind, searing itself deeper with every breath. If the crying boy wasn't the victim, who was? The world outside had shifted into something unrecognizable, and Sandra could feel it in the air. The way people avoided her eyes at the grocery store, the strange static on her phone calls, the flickering lights outside her apartment building that no one else seemed to notice. Every corner felt like a trap, every silence packed with unseen pressure. She hadn't slept in 2 days, and her dreams when she did close her eyes were filled with flashing images of the crying boy's face and the grainy photo of him, older, terrified, looking right into the camera as if begging for help. That single image lived in her bones now, haunting her every step. But what tore at her more than anything was the weight of betrayal, Ben's silence, Jules' death, the program that had watched her like prey. And now, with the envelope hidden beneath the loose floorboard in her kitchen, she was sitting on evidence that could crack the entire case wide open. But it came at a cost. The message came not long after. Another burner phone, this time dropped into her mailbox with a note. "You have 24 hours. The voice on the line when she answered wasn't familiar, but it spoke with precision and calm authority. "We know what you've taken. If you release it, you'll never see your brother again. If you cooperate, he lives." Simple. It wasn't simple. Not to Sandra. She froze, trying to make sense of it. Her brother, David, had died 10 years ago. At least, that's what she had been told. His car was found at the bottom of a river. Closed casket funeral. The grief had buried her alive for years. But now, the voice wasn't threatening her with a lie. They knew she wouldn't fall for that. It was a cruel twist of reality, implying that her brother had been alive all this time, another subject in this twisted program, possibly kept in some hidden location like the children they tested on buses. She didn't know what to believe. But the uncertainty was worse than any truth. The hours ticked by, and the options began to close in like walls. She tried reaching Ben, though every part of her told her it was a mistake. When he finally answered, his voice was laced with something she hadn't heard before: hesitation. Not guilt. Not denial. Something closer to resignation. She asked him outright, "Is he alive?" And after a long silence, Ben replied, "I can't tell you that, Sandra. But I can tell you this, whatever you think you know, you're still only halfway down the rabbit hole." Her heart nearly cracked open. "Did you know? About David?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Did you know all these years?" His silence was deafening. Then finally, "I tried to protect you." It was the most cowardly, soul-crushing thing he could have said. Because protection wasn't silence. It wasn't watching her unravel without answers. It was betrayal masquerading as love. And now, her world felt even smaller. Her circle of trust had burned to ashes. Sandra had one last option: take the data public. She could upload everything through whistleblower channels, drop the files to investigative journalists, leak them across Reddit and trending forums. She knew the right keywords: hidden government experiments, crying boy on school bus caught on camera, real-life mind control program, missing children 2025, and they would explode across social media like wildfire. The kind of exposure that couldn't be undone. But doing so might mean sentencing her brother, if he was alive, to death. That was the ultimatum, the impossible choice. Truth or family? Exposure or hope? Tears streamed down her face as she sat in front of the screen, cursor blinking over the upload button. Her chest tightened with every breath, the weight of everything pressing down on her. The lives lost, the secrets buried, the faces of children who didn't understand why their bus never made it home. And beneath it all, the aching possibility that David might still be somewhere, waiting. Or worse, already gone, and this entire threat just another level of manipulation to break her will. Just then, another message popped up on her laptop, this time from an unknown source. "You think you're making the decisions. You're not. But keep going. We're watching." Sandra stared at the screen in horror. Because it wasn't a threat this time. It was encouragement. Someone else, behind a curtain, pulling different strings. Someone not part of the official program. Someone rogue. The game was no longer about silence. It was about who could weaponize the truth faster. And that's when it hit her. Maybe she wasn't the only one being used. Maybe Ben wasn't the top of the betrayal ladder. Maybe there were more players, and worse, some of them wanted this to come out. Not to save lives, but to cause chaos. Sandra was no longer just holding a secret. She was holding a spark, and someone out there wanted to watch the world burn. Sandra never expected the real storm to come from the inside. The email arrived at 3:17 a.m., a time when the world feels quiet enough to whisper secrets, but dark enough to bury them. It was from Jules. Or rather, it was from her encrypted account, the one Sandra assumed had died with her body in that staged overdose. The subject line read only, "If you're reading this, I didn't make it." Sandra's hands trembled as she clicked it open, a cold knot forming in her stomach. The video began playing immediately, and there was Jules, alive, at least when it had been recorded. Her face pale, lips dry, but her voice steady like she had practiced this 100 times. She started with names, Dozens of them, some Sandra recognized as donors from education boards, school transportation regulators, even child psychologists who had spoken on national TV about new behavioral optimization programs. They weren't warning people, they were selling it. Jules explained how the crying child on the bus wasn't an accident or abuse. It was a controlled experiment meant to gauge public empathy, response latency, and emotional conditioning. Every recorded sob, every ignored plea was logged, analyzed, and cross-referenced with audience reactions on platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Reddit. The algorithm wasn't learning from them, it was learning about us. Then came the part that made Sandra drop the mug she was holding, the ceramic shattering across the floor, like her sense of reality. Jules had named Ben, not just as a former partner or passive observer, but as a key handler in the information control sector. He had been feeding her lies, rerouting her searches, even staging the recovery of the boy in the video to pacify her when she got too close. His job wasn't to silence her. It was to delay her just long enough for the project to go live on a national scale. Sandra's throat tightened as she tried to breathe. None of this was about the child anymore. The crying boy was the trigger, just the beginning. In the final seconds of the video, Jules leaned forward and whispered something that would haunt Sandra for the rest of her life. They need a reaction. Your outrage, your heartbreak, it's part of the data stream. Every click, every share, every tear, they're using it. Don't just expose them. Break the system. The screen went black. Sandra backed away from her laptop, as if it were laced with poison. All the pieces of the puzzle she'd fought so hard to gather now felt like trapdoors. Her movements were being monitored, her responses recorded, her pain monetized. She wasn't the outlier. She was the variable they were testing all along. That was the real twist. The conspiracy wasn't just happening around her, it was because of her. And then came the call, this time from her old mentor, Leah, someone she hadn't spoken to in years, someone who had taught her everything about digital security back in college. She didn't even know how Leah had gotten involved in any of this, but the voice on the other end was calm, urgent, and unmistakable. Sandra, Leah said, you're not the only one. They've flagged 6 others. People like you. People who asked too many questions. They're trying to make you the example. You're the control group. You don't get to win. The words hit harder than any threat. This wasn't just a single bus or a rogue experiment in one city. It was national. It was federal. And it was about control of thought, behavior, attention. Everything. And the scariest part? It was working. With trending topics like Caught on Camera, Real Conspiracy, Exposed Secrets 2025, and What Really Happened to the Crying Kid, the story had already gone viral. The public believed they were helping by watching and reacting, but in truth, they were fueling the machine. Sandra was no longer racing to reveal a secret. She was fighting to unhook the nation from a lie dressed as truth. Then came the knock on her door. A familiar rhythm. 3 slow taps, 1 quick. A code only she and Ben used to share. Sandra didn't move. Her phone buzzed again, this time a video file from a private source titled, Final Protocol, Execute Upon Compromise. She hadn't just been hunted. She had been set up to choose, betray everyone she knew by going silent, or flip the switch, and take down the entire operation with her. And she had only minutes left to decide. Sandra's breath came in shallow gasps as she stood frozen at her front door, the familiar rhythm of the knock echoing in her head like a death sentence. She knew what it meant, the 3 taps, the 1 quick. It wasn't a signal for help, nor an innocent visit. It was Ben, or at least she thought it was. Her heart pounded in her chest as she reached for the doorknob, her hand trembling. The digital clock on her phone flashed 3:48 a.m., and with it came the sudden, undeniable truth. She had no time left. The seconds were closing in on her, the weight of everything crashing down like an avalanche she could no longer outrun. She pulled the door open with a force she didn't know she had, expecting to see Ben's tired face, or maybe a stranger. But what stood before her was far worse, a man she had never seen before, but whose face sent a cold chill through her veins. His sharp suit and cold eyes gave nothing away, but his presence suffocated the air, making every second feel heavier than the last. Miss Tile, the man said, his voice calm, but with an edge that made her gut twist. We've been watching you for quite some time. You've proven yourself resourceful. He stepped forward, not waiting for her to invite him in, his shoes clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. We've been waiting for you to crack the code, but now it's time for us to see just how far you're willing to go. You think you're the only one who can play this game? You're just a piece in the puzzle, Sandra. She recoiled instinctively, but the man didn't pause. He continued, his eyes glinting with a dangerous sort of knowing. You didn't think they were trying to silence you, did you? Oh, no. You were never the target. You were just another test subject, like the others. Like your brother. Like the boy on the bus. Sandra's mind reeled. Her thoughts scrambled to catch up with the gravity of his words. Then, she whispered, her voice a hollow echo of the name. You were working with him? With all of them. The pieces were falling into place, faster than she could comprehend. Her brother's death wasn't a tragedy. It had been planned. A necessary sacrifice. Ben hadn't been trying to protect her. He had been leading her down this path all along, keeping her distracted, feeding her breadcrumbs to keep her digging in the right direction, while they watched. The man's lips curled into something like a smile, though there was nothing comforting about it. Your brother's death was necessary for this to work. And you were always going to be the catalyst. You just didn't know it. He nodded toward the screen of her laptop, still open to the encrypted files. That information? It was never meant for anyone else. But you wanted to expose it, didn't you? That's where your usefulness ends. You have one choice now. Upload the data and we'll stop everything. Your brother, the others, it all stops. Or you walk away and nothing changes. Sandra's pulse quickened as the weight of his words settled like a stone in her stomach. The room felt impossibly small, the walls closing in as she realized that she had been living in a lie. Everything she had done to uncover the truth was part of a larger plan, a sick game she didn't even know she was playing. Her mind raced, the pieces clicking together in a way she wasn't ready for. Ben's betrayal, her brother's death, Jules' warning. All of it. It was a manipulation designed to control her. But what if there was another way? What if he was lying to her now? The realization hit her like a thunderclap. She wasn't the only one being watched. She was being played. You're not in control here, Sandra, the man sneered, sensing her shift in focus. You never were. Her heart pounded louder now, her mind battling the overwhelming urge to back away from the situation. She had been running on empty for days, but this was no longer about survival. It was about choice. And for the first time, she wasn't going to play their game. She wasn't going to be the pawn anymore. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal of the gun hidden in the drawer beneath the table, her last resort, an object that had once felt so foreign, so out of place, now taking on a sense of familiarity that terrified her. This was her moment of truth. She could feel the eyes of the man on her as he moved toward her laptop, trying to outmaneuver her once more. His confidence was palpable, but it made one fatal error. He underestimated her. With one swift motion, Sandra grabbed the gun, raising it towards him. His eyes flickered, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he laughed. The sound was harsh and cold. You think this changes anything? He asked. You've already lost. Before Sandra could respond, everything went dark. The lights, the room, her thoughts. A massive force slammed into her chest, sending her stumbling backward, her vision spiraling into blackness. The impact left her breathless, gasping for air, the weight of her body pressing against the ground as the sound of footsteps echoed around her. When she finally regained her senses, the room was empty. The man was gone, but the gun was still in her hand. The laptop screen was shattered, the evidence gone, vanished like a mirage. And then, the final twist, a single text message appeared on her phone. It read, "The game has only just begun." The days that followed were a blur of questions with no answers. Sandra had done everything in her power to uncover the truth, to piece together the fragments of a story that no one else had cared to see. But in the end, the truth was no longer hers to control. The power she thought she had been fighting for, the choice, the justice, the answers, slipped through her fingers like sand, just when she thought she could grasp it all. The text message had been the final nail in the coffin. The game has only just begun. It wasn't a warning. It was a reality check. A reminder that the system she had tried to tear down wasn't going anywhere.
It had only evolved.
And she, unknowingly, had played right into its hands. Her phone buzzed again, and Sandra's heart skipped a beat. This time, it was a news alert. Investigation into national data experiment escalates as multiple whistleblowers come forward. The headline read like a victory, a flicker of hope that the truth would finally break through the noise. But Sandra knew better. She knew that this fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She'd done what she could, but the enemy wasn't something she could just destroy with a single blow. It was embedded in the very fabric of society, in the way people interacted with the world, in the way they shared and reacted, in the way they were constantly being watched. Sandra had exposed the experiment, sure, but what she had really uncovered was the scope of the control, the depth of the manipulation, the power of the unseen hands pulling the strings. There were no simple solutions. No clear ending. Weeks passed, and Sandra tried to return to some semblance of normal life. She spent hours at her desk, the laptop screen reflecting her tired face as she scrolled through countless news articles, trying to keep up with the aftermath of her discoveries. The public outrage was loud and growing. People were waking up to the fact that they had been part of a larger experiment, unknowingly contributing to a massive data operation that had been collecting their every move, their every emotional reaction. There were protests, petitions, demands for justice. But even as the world around her seemed to change, Sandra couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spiraling beyond her control. The game wasn't over. It had just changed direction. And she had no idea where it would lead next. Then, one night, as she was sitting alone in her apartment, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Ben. She hadn't heard from him since the night everything had fallen apart. She had thought him dead, thought him a ghost, someone who had played his part in the experiment and disappeared. The message was short, just a single line. "I was never trying to hurt you." It was vague, cryptic, and filled with more questions than answers. But the weight behind those words hit her in a way that she couldn't explain. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It was a message that tied everything together in a way that made her feel like she was missing something bigger. Ben hadn't been working for the system. He had been trying to expose it too. But his method, his approach, it had been flawed, dangerous. Maybe it was his attempt to protect her that had cost them both everything. Maybe he had believed that if he kept Sandra close, she would never see the truth. Sandra stared at the message, the implications sinking in slowly. There was a part of her that wanted to blame him, her brother, her partner, the person she had trusted most. But deep down, she knew the truth. Ben had been just as much a pawn in this twisted game as she had. The system was bigger than both of them, bigger than anyone could have imagined. And even now, as the world began to wake up to the reality of what had been done to them, Sandra couldn't help but feel the bitter truth settling in. There was no escaping it. There was no going back to who they were before all of this had started. But then something unexpected happened. As the investigation continued to unfold, as more and more whistleblowers came forward, Sandra found herself at the center of something much larger than herself. People started reaching out to her, not just with questions, but with their own stories. Victims, survivors, ordinary people who had been part of the experiment without even realizing it. They wanted answers, they wanted justice, and they wanted someone to lead them through the chaos. For the first time since the whole nightmare began, Sandra realized something she hadn't expected. She wasn't alone. There was power in the truth, in exposing the machine that had controlled them all for so long. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to break it. But as the pieces of the puzzle continued to shift, Sandra couldn't help but wonder, was she the one who would bring this all crashing down, or had she simply become another cog in the machine? She looked out the window, the city lights flickering beneath the dark sky, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt before. Hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that came from a clean victory or a final solution. It was the kind that came from knowing that there was still something worth fighting for, something worth uncovering, even if the battle was far from over. And just as she closed her laptop, the The screen went dark, but a message popped up one last line. The truth is out there, Sandra. But it's not what you think. As the room fell silent, Sandra's heart raced. The game had changed. But in the end, it was never about the game. It was about what happened when the rules were exposed, and who was left standing when the final move was made. The story was far from over. And whatever happened next, Sandra knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't be the only one playing. The rest of the world had just begun to wake up. And they were all in this together.